Okay, we're going to start up the live stream. Good afternoon. I'd like to call the Tuesday, August 15th, 2023 regular board meeting of the Comox Valley Regional District to order. And I'd like to just, since we have some people in the gallery today, let you know that in case of emergency, we have exits on either side of the room. And the marshalling point is in the parking lot behind you. If you need to use the washroom during the meeting, you can exit to your left and go down the hallway, and then the washrooms are behind us. And I would also like to cover a few basic meeting protocols to ensure our meeting is conducted in an orderly fashion. As your chair, I'm mindful that some of the items to be discussed at this meeting may be controversial, and I aim to ensure that we have a fair, safe, and productive meeting. A safe meeting environment means we should be free to share different opinions and perspectives without fear. Respect for each other, CVRD staff, and all members of the public is integral to creating this type of environment. This meeting is not a public hearing, so public presentations are facilitated through the delegations to the board, in which we only have one this evening. In this regard, shouting or heckling during the presentations from the delegation or during the subsequent deliberations by the directors will not be tolerated. I also ask that you refrain from clapping or calling out in show of support, as this too can be disruptive and intimidating, and waiting for silence will only lengthen the meeting. I thank you for your adherence to these meeting protocols as I've explained them. So next, I would like to acknowledge that we're on the unceded traditional territory of the Comox First Nation, the original keepers of this land. And the CVRD has made a commitment to reconciliation. And as part of that commitment, we educate ourselves on the contents of the calls to action of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. So we have been doing that, and that is our practice. And today we have call to action 29 regarding justice. We call upon the parties, and in particular, the federal government, to work collaboratively with plaintiffs not included in the Indian Residential School Settlement Agreement to have disputed legal issues determined expeditiously on an agreed set of facts. And if you're not familiar with the Indian Residential School Settlement Agreement, I encourage you to do some more research and understand its limitations. Thank you. So next we have our recommendation for moving in camera following the regular meeting. Moved by Grieve, second by Hillian. Thank you. We'll be moving in camera following the regular meeting according to section 292B of the Community Charter. All in favor? Any opposed? That's carried. Thank you. We have adoption of minutes from July 25th. Moved by Grant, seconded by Moran. Thank you. Any discussion of those minutes? So vote the full board. All in favor? Any opposed? That's carried. Thank you. And then adoption of minutes from August 9th.
Second.
Moved by Grant, seconded by Jolicoeur. Thank you. All in favor? Any opposed? That's carried. That takes us to the delegation follow-up from the active transportation route Comox Valley presentation. Over to staff.
Thanks, Madam Chair. And as is our practice at the CVRD board meetings, when there are delegations presented at the following meeting, the brief summary is often provided about staff action or response to the delegations, and then it would be up to the board to consider any further direction if needed on those matters. And so today we have Robin Holmes, who is our Manager of Long Range Planning and Sustainability, who will provide that brief update to the board. So Robin.
Through the acting CEO to the chair and the directors, since staff was here at the board on July 25th, Urban Systems has been retained to support in the preparation of engineered drawings, as well as a grant submission for the Royston Road Improvement Project. We are aiming for an October deadline. Staff will then move on to the Cumberland to Courtney connector as the next priority project, and staff will be engaging with the Citizens for Safe Recycling as a part of that process in order to understand understand what the needs and interests are in that corridor. And as well, I'd like to mention that staff also have met with Andrew Clements as a part of the engagement process and the prioritization of the ATMP projects and provided an overview of the priority projects. It is the intention that the ATMP is an iterative plan and can be updated as progress is made on implementing the projects. Although the Little Road project was not identified in the top, in the immediate and midterm projects, this can be revisited in the future as we make progress with our applications to grant projects.
Great, thank you very much. Any questions? Director Arbor, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Chair, and thanks, Robin, for the update. In terms of the active transportation plan, I mean, it's good what happened at the last meeting because we're seeing somebody who has, different priorities that are highlighted. I know with the transit future plan, we have a pretty regular update to it every 5 years. Can you speak as to whether we're going to plan some updates like that to that plan as we encounter opportunities or challenges?
Sorry.
Through the acting CEO to Director Arbor, I think that would be a really good idea because as concerns are brought forward and issues are now become known, staff can go back and revisit that prioritization. We have a really good evaluation framework that can be updated. And as we work through the list, I think it will be easier to be able to identify what those new priorities are.
So just confirming that staff will let those two groups that came forward last meeting know where they can participate further in the active transportation plan. You don't need a resolution for that.
Through the acting CEO to Director, to Chair, yes, we can do that. We were planning to include them in that engagement process, and It just allows us to be able to hear from the community what those concerns are.
Great, thanks so much. Oh, and I forgot to mention that we have two alternate directors standing in today. So I wanted to welcome alternate Director Jolicoeur and alternate Director Nicol, and go ahead with your question, Director Nicol.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, through the chair. Does this involve any of the railroad bed?
Does our active transportation plan involve the
The
railroad?
island corridor, does it involve eventually any of the island, the old island where the railroad used to go from Courtney down?
The active transportation network plan certainly has reference to the corridor. That said, the priorities that the board established at the last meeting included the Courtney to Cumberland connector and the Royston area as the highest priorities, and they don't have any reference or overlap to the corridor.
Okay, so there is any portion of it going through KFN land, and I assume if it is, they're part of the consultation process. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions? Okay. We actually didn't do receipt for that, so I think we can just move on to delegations. Hopefully our presenters are here. We have the Mid-Island Farmers Institute regarding water crisis. And welcoming Diane Jackson and Arzina Hamir. Can I get a motion for receipt, please? Moved by Grant, second by Grieve, thank you. And welcome, you have 10 minutes to present.
Okay, thank you so much for having us. My name is Diane Jackson. I'm the president of the Mid-Island Farmers Institute. More importantly, though, I'm a small farmer in the Comox Valley. So we just thought we'd start off today with just a bit of a personal view of how the water crisis is affecting small farmers. We have a dugout at our farm and it's virtually empty. So we water once a week, and we've been doing that probably since the beginning of July in order to conserve the water that we did have in the dugout. It doesn't refresh. It doesn't seem to be part of the Solum aqueduct or aquifer, I think it's called. So we're looking at having to truck water in for our cistern in the future, which will cost about $200 a week to water once a week in order to feed the valley. And this is what we do for a living, is grow produce. And so we're really hoping that we can get the CBRD along with some of the other people that are involved to come up with a good crisis management plan so that farmers like myself, like Arzina, and even the hay farmers, that's another really big one. And I know a lot of people think that it's not as big, but we have sheep as well, and we have to feed them hay, and we had to buy our winter hay in early July this year. Because if we didn't buy it then we weren't going to have any, because they haven't been able to do more than maybe a cut and a half this year, because they are very aware that there's no water. And so they're not watering their fields like they normally would. And then we see the golf courses and I hate to say it, but as I was driving by the water park, people play. I did want to stop and just go and jump in and get wet because it's super hot out today. And but yeah, so I just wanted to give a little bit of perspective as to the problems that small farmers are facing in regards to the water crisis and the stresses that we are going through, and the water police coming by our farms, and you know, the possibility of threats of not being able to water. They're very nice people, and I know that they're just doing their job, but it's a scary situation to be in. And you know, when you're seeing your livelihood going, you know, we've had an abundant year this year. We've had great weather for it, but unfortunately we haven't had the rain other than, you know, when it stopped in April. So thank you so much, and I'll hand over to Arzina and she'll go on with the presentation.
Thanks, Diane, and thanks to you directors. As Diane mentioned, you know, the Valley is having to face such a severe drought, one like we've never seen before. Apart from vegetable growers having to now sacrifice crops and pull them out because there's no water left. As Diane mentioned, many producers that are raising animals are having to pay exorbitant amounts of money for hay. And one cattle farmer I spoke to said he'd already spent $10,000 on his winter feed and had fed that feed already because his own hay had already run out. So it's not an understatement to say that this is actually a crisis here in the Valley. And as Diane mentioned, we are having to face, as farmers, natural resource officers coming to our properties and telling us that potentially we can no longer water. So, sorry, I've not had to do the clicker. Oh, I think that's not the first slide, sorry. Lisa, would you mind? So what the Mid-Island Farmers Institute is asking, we have 4 asks of the regional district in this very difficult time of need. The first and foremost is for the CVRD to convene a watershed roundtable, specifically around the Solom River watershed, with representatives from those organizations that are listed on the screen. Why should the regional district be the one to do this? Because I've heard that this is not this level of government's purview. However, you are the level of government that is closest to the farmers. Farmers have very little voice with some of the other organizations on this group. And I think as local government, you have relationships with many of the others and have the ability to bring people together, to bring organizations together. This is not a financial ask of the regional district. This is a convening ask. We need to have specifically the Ministry of Forests and Mosaic at the table. Management of our watershed is in quite a disarray. And unfortunately, it is the farmers who are having to bear the brunt of the mismanagement. We, in fact, are the victims of watershed mismanagement. When we can no longer water our fields, water our animals, and we are being told to sacrifice and stop watering, while you still have forestry happening up in the headwaters, it just does not make sense. And why should farmers have to bear the brunt of the burden? Ask number 2. We are, and I should have mentioned, sorry, that ask number 1 was actually a recommendation from the CVRD's own Solom River watershed plan. So that was actually the first ask. This second ask is to provide zero interest loans up to $10,000 for farmers to either install dugouts or install cisterns for rainwater catchment. Yes, the province does fund both of these things, but the funding, if you do try and apply to the province, they require you to do a water management plan and then to provide engineered drawings. So this doubles the price of what should be less than a $10,000 install. Each of those plans costs around $5,000. So the overall ask and the burden on the farmer is actually much higher. If the CVRD wished to do so, and we know that this was an option when you wanted to replace wood stoves by providing zero interest loans, farmers would be able to follow a provincial dugout plan, and I've just posted the cover on this slide. And all of the engineered drawings are in that plan, and all of the steps that farmers need to follow. So if there was a worry about just liability, if farmers follow this plan, it's a very safe and understandable plan. Now, ask number 3. We are asking that the CVRD align planning priorities to take drought levels into account. So first and foremost, we don't feel that this is being done presently. We have one major aquifer in the Solom River watershed, Aquifer 408, which we all draw upon. And farmers are being told that they need to sacrifice irrigation when neighbors around us are using water for their own home purposes, and individual homes do not need to have any kind of water sacrifice. So again, pitting farmers against residential folks, I think, is a really difficult and dangerous situation to be in. I did have, photos of another area, which I think it's maybe, I don't know if folks remember seeing photos like this of the almond growers in California having to rip out their almond trees because of lack of water, wherein the same system was providing water to the suburbs of Los Angeles and other metropolitan areas of California. It seems ludicrous that you would sacrifice one for the other. And it's easy to criticize another jurisdiction. But in fact, we have the same situation starting to arise here in the Comox Valley, where farmers are being told, no, you can't water. But at the same time, more and more density in the rural areas, drawing on the aquifer, is being approved without any thought about how we balance the needs of food security with the needs of population. Population does have other areas that it can go. And so we're asking that your planning department please use water as, if not the first, a priority level when approving or not future development.
So maybe you could just leave the 4th ask up
Sure.
for discussion as we've run out of time.
Thank you.
And I'll thank you for the presentation. I'll go to the board. Are there any questions about presentation? Director Arber, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Chair, and thanks for the presentation to the two of you. I'll just start by saying, I'll start by what you left us with really at the end there, which is there might be a role for us to advocate to the province whether we could actually have a change in the overarching policy guiding water. So I come from the province of Quebec, where over there it's priority of use as opposed to priority in time. In British Columbia, it's whomever gets the license first gets to hold it. In Quebec, things like agriculture or otherwise would be prioritized in use, or for household consumption. There's actually an entire scheme there, and maybe with what we're facing in British Columbia over the coming years, we could encourage the province to actually look at that. And locally, in regards to agriculture in the Comox Valley, I think, as you're probably aware, we've been working towards an agricultural plan, but I'm not quite sure. I'll have to go back and reread it, and I'm not quite sure whether we have the buy-in necessary for the kind of broad interventions. But I thought that some of the suggestions you had around some of the programs we could look at are very good. I don't know if staff, when do we expect because this would be at ESC, when would we expect the agricultural plan to come back to our table for further discussion?
Thank you, Director. So Lisa Kilpatrick, our Community Development and Resilience Manager, is online, and she might be able to weigh in to provide some perspective on that. My understanding is that some of the work around the agricultural planning work, some of those findings may be available in the fall, and we would be able to come back to the EASC, Electoral Area Services Committee, to report on some of those findings. But Lisa, if you have anything to add, and I think I see you online there.
I think you're still muted, Lisa.
There we go. Sorry, through the chair to the directors. Yes. So the phase 2 of the engagement process wrapped up at the end of June, and the consultants have been working on finalizing the interim report. So the next steps are to meet with the Agricultural Plan Advisory Committee in September, and then it will come to the EASD with recommendations in October.
Thank you. Next, we have Director Greaves. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you both very much for coming with this very important issue. I'm sure we're not the only jurisdiction in BC that are facing this head on. So it seems surprising to me that the ministry would be sending people around to police dugouts that are already existing. I guess it's something that has something to do with water licensing and the fact there's inflows into that, and then it becomes their issue because the province is the sole authority over water. I'm not sure. I think Director Arbor hit the nail when he said that our biggest power is the power of persuasion again. So advocacy to the senior government. But insofar as the roundtable goes, I mean, I think that's a very worthy project that we can probably take on over and above the ag plan and everything else. I mean, if worse comes to worse, it's something that one of the two or three of the electoral area directors can actually fund out of their own constituency dollars, because it's very little staff time as well, except for maybe some of the secretarial stuff. So I think that would be a worthy and achievable outcome of you bringing forward this to us. But I'm not too sure about where funding would come from in terms of a low interest loan or something like that for local government. There's probably a discussion we should have after this presentation at a further meeting, whether the board or the electoral area services. And mostly electoral area services are, is the purview of agriculture falls under that. So, but no, absolutely, this is the burning issue, no pun, of our time. And I can tell you that even on my street, we have people with wells going dry, and other people have no problem at all, and they're separated by a few hundred meters, not very much at all. So it's a hit and miss game. I know that every time we get these situations, my wife makes me pull the lid off the well and measure it every day to see where it's going. Luckily, it seems to be coming back up to its happy places, which is about 12 and a half feet of water. But even then, all the dishes and the hand washing and all that goes into a tub that goes on the bushes. So, I mean, we're probably better. We probably are more connected in the rural areas. I don't think anybody in the city does that, but you know, that's the way you operate when every drop is precious. So I just want you to tell you it's not falling on deaf ears, and whatever we can do to help, that's within our powers to help. Number one, I think the roundtable is a great idea. So thanks for bringing it forward.
Thanks. If I may respond, we appreciate that, and just wanted to point out that both Farmers Institutes are on board with this idea and with this presentation. We have support from the wider agricultural community. I didn't want to say where this funding should come from, but I do want to note that we as farmers, we're not just feeding the rural population. It is the urban population that also is fed from the water that we extract from our properties. And if the burden shouldn't fall solely on electoral areas, is I guess what I'm trying to say. If the regional growth strategy had some funds available, or at least that could be a holder, then the burden would be shared amongst all of the members of the RD.
Thanks for that. Next, we have alternate director Nicol.
Yeah, thank you very much through the chair. I couldn't agree more with Director Grieve, Director Herbert, and yourselves. Water is a huge issue. Unfortunately, it's governed by the province, and the old theory of first in line, or first in time, first in line. There's been a lot of water licenses given out with huge amounts of water that they can take out, and they really don't need that much. But I really believe that the province has to sit back and rethink the whole thing, because there's going to be less and less water in the rivers, in the aquifers. Something seriously has to be set. That they got to sit down and really think about the water management. So if we could do any pressure, persuasive pressure on the provincial government to rethink their water use plan, be greatly appreciated. I fully support it.
Thank you. Next, we have Director Morin.
Great. Thank you, Chair. And thank you so much for the delegation. I would agree that although sometimes these delegations come forward and they appear to be more of an electoral issue, because of course the watershed is an electoral area, to me, this is absolutely a regional issue. As a rep on the Food Policy Council and someone who advocates for local food security, we also have on our agenda today our proposed strat plan, which includes climate crisis, environmental stewardship, which is a commitment to reducing our impact on the environment, ensuring we can adapt and respond to climate change impacts, which is exactly what this is. I wanted to just comment that, that the water conversation has been huge this summer. Many residents emailing, inquiring why there aren't more restrictions. And of course, we have all these different watersheds, and some are, have tons of capacity and some don't, and people don't understand why, some areas are not conserving. I made a point at another meeting, I'm sure others did as well, that I think it is very difficult to see other people around you, using water to excess when you're not even able to provide water for your food that you're helping to support the community with. So I do think that there is an element of solidarity that we should be, as the municipal partners, should be supporting. I wanted to mention the water park just because I totally get that. I think the one thing with the water park, and this may not, it looks like it's just it is lots of fun. I have a grandson I take there. However, it's actually become part of our cooling, as part of our strategy for cooling in these heat waves, that people, lower income folks, more vulnerable folks can go and access that for cooling off. We've had hundreds and hundreds of people die in heat waves over the last couple summers. And it's actually one way that we can help cool people off. So I do appreciate the comment, and I do think that there are other ways that we're definitely wasting water, but that is one rationale behind, and that's also a rationale for us having free admission to the outdoor pool for the rest of the summer in Courtenay. So I just wanted to point that out. I wanted to ask, just out of curiosity, you referenced, supporting with locally grown food. I would assume that the biggest percentage of your food it doesn't go anywhere else. It stays here. Yeah, I'm wondering if you have a sense of what that percentage would be, because I do see this as really intertwined with food security, climate action, and it's bigger than just one issue.
Yeah, I would be really confident in saying the farmers that I farm around and that produce for the farmers markets, it's 100% staying in the valley.
Yeah.
The Comox Valley Farmers Market is in collaboration with the BC Farmers Market, and they have a coupon program that has been just so advantageous, not only to the farmers, but to the people that it uses. They get one, it's not just about providing fresh produce to seniors or lower income families. It's also one of their other aims in it is to actually get people that might not go out to the farmers market, and it really does that. And it's been fantastic. So that the food that we grow is staying here.
Yeah.
There's very few farmers that are big enough to be shipping it out.
So as much as I appreciate that, in fairness, you brought up the livelihood, this is your business. I think it's also very fair to say that this is an emergency response in light of what we're facing, and food security is huge. And as you showed the photo of California, there's much more produce that's not going to come our way in the coming years. And we really do need to build a resilient local food system. And we can't do that without water. So thank you. As you know, we don't consider the delegation at this meeting, but no pun intended, but lots of food for thought. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Director Cole Hamilton.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks so much for the presentation. I wish that there had been more than 10 minutes available, as there was a lot in there. And I just really appreciate the comments around the table. I don't want to reiterate all of them, but I think I would agree the watershed roundtable makes a lot of sense. I think that municipalities should, where there's a need for support, should be part of that support. I know that the food that I eat, wherever possible, comes from the Comox Valley. It's what feeds my family. So I would it's not a rural issue. And it's just also supporting what I think Director Arbor was saying about advocating to the province for the much bigger picture of reorganizing water rights. That's just a debate, a discussion that has to happen, and a change that needs long-term to occur. The question I had was re-ask number 4, which I know you just ran before you were able to get to. And I was wondering if you could just give us a little bit of context on, particularly on the job description need to be modified, and the point about the exit interview. I was just wondering if you could give us some context on those specific elements of ask number 4.
Sure. So from what I remember, when this job description was put together, there was quite a heavy burden on the on the person who filled this job to work on bylaws and internal policy, rather than being more outward facing into and active in the agricultural community. And it took a very long time to fill this position. When I looked at the job description, it was a full-time job, but it was only paying about 50,000, if that. So, you know, I think an adjustment to the job description is required to be commensurate with how much funding is available for this position. Because at the moment, I don't think it is. And if we need to layer in support for water, many farmers don't know what funding is available. And, you know, this position could be that support into the community, supporting farmers, letting them know what's available, you know, just someone who's out there. But I'm not sure if an exit interview was conducted with the previous coordinator, because it would be interesting to know why they left that position. Yeah.
Thank you. Next, we have alternate director Joey Cart.
Thanks, Chair. And really happy for the presentation today, because I was able to attend a few months ago with Chair Kettler and other directors, the community engagement session on the agricultural plan on water, and specifically the session on water management. And really what I'm seeing in this presentation, what I'm hearing from your group is really aligned from what I heard from the farmers in the room that day. I was at the Merville Hall, and a lot of concern, and this was pre-drought, around the upcoming summer season, specifically the concerns around the Solon River and Portuguese Creek. And I guess I have two questions really. You know, we spoke about, you presented dugouts and cisterns as an option, and that, from my understanding, was also one of the recommendations in the phase 2 of the agricultural plan, as the highest option for farmers and for people to conserve water. And I'm curious, you know, we're experiencing drought now, but we know from the studies around climate impacts that the water demand for agriculture, when we look at the 2050 realities of what we're going to be in, is going to increase between 3 to 7 times. And so I'm wondering if you can speak to some of these activities or methods of conserving water as a means to be adaptive towards climate change. And then I do have a second question.
Well, first and foremost, we don't water like we should. So one of the really big drawbacks to that is that, like happened in California, we have to start pulling crops before we need to, because they can't produce anymore. We can't water them anymore. So we're losing out on viable crops. Okay, I lost my train of thought. Oh, from the dugout. So, you know, a lot of people have been saying that the dugouts are part of the aquifer. They recharge from the groundwater. They don't. You would have to go probably down at least 25 feet to hit the groundwater. And I think ours is 15 feet. Yours is 18 feet. Yeah. So we're nowhere near it. What's in there is leftover from when it rained, and that's it. So once it's gone, it's gone. And then we have cisterns, but my cistern, which is I believe 5,000 liters, 3,000 gallons or 3,500 gallons, lasts an hour for watering. So, but you know, even with the dugout, I'm only watering an hour a week. So, you know, and we just spent $10,000 on setting up new irrigation system on the farm this year.
Right.
So at least it's hitting exactly where it needs to hit. But it does take quite a bit of water. So
Yeah.
I'll just I'll reiterate, dugouts are actually such a cost-effective way for farmers to store water on their land. It doesn't require a license if it's not hitting groundwater. And this is the one thing that you're probably hearing that farmers are really fed up with applying for licenses and the paperwork that's required. And then they get these visits from NRO. So dugouts, you know, versus cisterns, they're both, I think they're both required. I'm hearing from some farmers that they can't put in a dugout without hitting groundwater. So the option for them to use cisterns. Cisterns are an above ground plastic, receptacle. 3,000 to 6,000 gallons is about the size that a farmer would be needing. And they are more expensive than a dugout, but if you are, worried about heating groundwater and requiring a license, this is an option for those farmers, or farmers who have very sandy or gravelly soils that can't hold water in the ground. That's the other option. So having those two, you're collecting rain during the winter months when we know we get a very high amount of water coming down at once. So it's a very passive way of collecting water, holding it, and actually both Diane and I with dugouts, we are actually supporting the health of the aquifer, because that water does slowly seep into the aquifer. So the more dugouts that we can see in the valley, it would be better for all of us.
Yeah. Thank you. Can I have one more question? Yeah, and I just that sounds quite like a bleak picture, that even with these technologies that we still need to engage in other sorts of conservation activities to support, and it's that one directional, that the dugouts actually support the aquifer rather than us being able to draw from the aquifer through the dugouts. That's an interesting piece I wasn't aware of. Thank you for that. I guess my last question is the realities of the farmers, particularly around the Solom right now. And again, from what I heard at that session was, I'm wondering if you can draw the connection for us between farmers irrigating out of their wells and the health of the Solom River and other watersheds that we have in the regional district.
I don't know how much the two are actually related. Because domestic use, other than people washing their cars or needlessly watering trees that don't need to be watered. But as far as I know.
Okay,
she's gonna.
I've got an answer, so.
Okay, she's got the answer.
Well, you've asked a really good question, Director Jolicoeur. The Ministry of Forests, who is providing farmers with these licenses, has given farmers one answer and you as a regional district a totally different answer. So for farmers, we are told that Aquifer 408 is connected to the Solom River, and that when we take water out of our aquifer, that we are impacting the river. You as directors were told, well, electoral area directors, that there is no connection when you approved a water bottling or water facility on Sackville Road. So I have no idea, quite honestly, what the connection is between my well and the river. I don't believe there is one, but we are now being told by these resource officers that we have to stop using our aquifer because somehow we are drawing out of the river. I don't think it makes sense. I think logically anyone would know that there's no connection there, especially, we are not physically pulling water out of the Solom. We're pulling it from Aquifer 408. What I actually think is happening right now is that the province is using the drought as an excuse to come down on farmers who didn't license their wells. And that's just it. There was no fish conservation. There's no ecological need. It's just retribution.
Next, we have Director Kerr.
Thank you, and thank you for the presentation. This topic really, brings a lot of issues together. Local food production, supporting local businesses and farmers, and of course, climate change. We do see that there's a bit of 50% increase in water consumption in the summer, and a lot of that, especially in the urban areas, is due to lawn watering. I'm an early morning riser and early morning runner, and it's amazing how many sprinklers are going off at 5:30 in the morning all through town. It's funny, I don't know if anyone saw the news this week, 4 cities on the mainland, Abbotsford, Chilliwack, a couple others, they're having a online contest to upload your brown lawns, be proud of your brown lawns, making it like popular to do that. So that's something maybe we can do here locally, have more people consider not watering grass. My question really is about number 4 again, because I'm not too familiar with this agriculture coordinator role. What do you see them doing, and how do you think specifically they would be able to help with the water issue? Thanks.
So right now there are multiple sources of funding specific to water. There is an agricultural water infrastructure fund. There is a best management practices fund that farmers can apply to, but not a lot of farmers know about it. They often have to do an environmental farm plan first. So, specifically for water, this coordinator could be that source of information, someone trusted in the community that people can go to for information. Ideally, the coordinator is not just a water person. They're an extensionist, they're a support person in the community. They could help pull together a roundtable or, hear the needs of what farmers are asking for and be a conduit between farmers, the regional district, and potentially the Ministry of Ag. So that could be part of the role.
Thank you. Next, we have Director Hillian.
Thank you, Chair. I know that in general, we don't make decisions about delegation asks on the night of, but this is being presented to us as a crisis. So I have 2 related questions. One is whether staff feel like they would be in any position to engage on these issues the next time we meet. And then the second question is that we have a regular opportunity right now for chairs and mayors to take part in regular dialogue with provincial ministers related to the wildfire and drought situation. And it's likely that that next opportunity will come up before we meet again. And so I wonder if there's an opportunity to raise these concerns with our provincial ministers, given the focus that they're having on these issues right now.
So the first question on preparation for the follow-up for next meeting.
Yeah, the question is whether staff feel that they could potentially engage on this issue the next time we meet.
I think it's entirely up to the board to pass a resolution to ask staff to take a look into this. There's 4 very clear asks in the delegation, and that's appreciated. We understand what those questions are, the requests are, and so referring to staff to follow up with the delegation is something that the board can consider today. And then depending on how that follow-up goes, we'd be able to report back to the board. Typically, there is a referral to staff is okay for.
Yeah, I'd be prepared to move that if it's appropriate once we deal with receipt. Chair, thanks.
Thank you. And then on the second question, Director, I'm very willing to put forward a question both around changes to the water allocation laws of BC, as was described earlier, the first in time, first and right versus priority of use, and encouraging a move toward priority of use on the next call that we have for the emergency management. I think there's some other things that we could do here that don't necessarily involve the province. The watershed roundtable obviously is a good idea. There's other examples. I think the Okanagan, for example, has a water board. It has many stakeholders. It's a consensus-based decision-making model there. And I don't think the province is issuing any licenses without discussion to that water board. And I think if we had something like that, and of course, this request today is just around the Solom, but if it extended to the broader watershed, I think we could have greater influence on the provincial decisions of water allocation within the watershed here. And then also aligning our priorities with the request from the province. So for 2 weeks in a row, the ministers have asked that we increase water restrictions where we can. When this was brought to the board at the last meeting, we heard from staff that the next 2 stages of water restrictions are dependent on BC Hydro and what they release for environmental flows for fish flows. And I think that was more applicable when we were drawing right from the dam area. But now that we have the deep water intake, I think that we can decouple that decision-making process and take back some of that decision-making power around increasing the restrictions on water use. So happy to have that conversation as well. And I see Director Morin has her light up. Go ahead.
Not sure if what you referenced, the Ag Infrastructure Fund, if that's different than the agricultural recovery program. It sounds like it's quite different. But I know some of us were on the call that Director Hillian referenced around drought and wildfire, and that was brought up as having over $200 million for irrigation, water storage, water delivery, et cetera. And it sounds like many people maybe don't know about that, don't know how to access it. So your idea around perhaps that under the ag plan being some help in helping people to access, because the ministers, of course, were saying, please have your farmers contact us. We want to help. But if people don't know, I mean, that sounds like there is some help there, and it would be good to help facilitate folks being able to access it. Thank you.
Thanks. And if I can just answer that, one way of doing that for an agricultural coordinator is to have an open house at a farm that was able to access the funds so that they can see that this funding is real, how it's used, what the farmer went through, what the cost was. So things like that, the agricultural coordinator can help facilitate.
Great, thank you. I don't see any further lights, so thank you so much for the presentation.
Thank you.
And we are on receipt. Let's vote the full board. All in favor? Any opposed? That's carried. And Director Hillian, go ahead.
Thanks, Chair. I'll move that we refer the delegation's request to staff for a report at the next board meeting.
Seconded by Grant. Any further discussion? Okay, it's a vote of full board. All in favor? Any opposed? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. Okay, so that was our only delegation for the evening. We're moving on to reports. Next, we have the public hearing for bylaw number 683, the Saratoga Speedway, July 19th. It was moved by Grant, seconded by Cole Hamilton. And I will pass it over to staff.
Thank you, Chair. And Directors, what is on the agenda today are the minutes and the submissions to the public hearing that was held on July 19th to consider bylaw number 683. That is the Rural Comox Valley Zoning Bylaw number 520, amendment number 8 for the Saratoga Speedway application. And following receipt of the minutes and the submissions, the directors are able to consider several options with respect to the bylaw. Those options, and staff are available to answer questions along the way as well. Those options available to the directors here are to approve the bylaw to proceed to by giving the bylaw third reading, to deny the bylaw or application and not proceed further. In that event, the applicant would a reapplication would be available to the applicant, but they would have to wait for a year if the application is substantially the same. A third option for the directors would be to amend the bylaw at second reading. If there's some aspect that you look to amend the bylaw for. And fourthly, a fourth option would be to return the application back to staff for additional information to be provided. And we would ask for some direction of what that additional information might be. I should note that these last two options, amending at second reading and returning the application back to staff, could trigger the requirement for a second public hearing if new information is introduced to the application at that time. So staff are available to answer any questions that the directors may have.
Thank you. And we have a question from Director Moran. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Of course, I'm not part of the electoral area, so I won't be deciding on this, but I did have a question just in terms of process for the public hearing, just comparing it to what we do in the municipalities. And usually we have a summary of, we obviously have all the submissions provided to us, but we also have a summary of in favor, neutral, or not in favor. And I'm wondering, does staff do that? Because I didn't see that in the report. I don't know how much fun the electoral areas directors had in going through the hundreds of submissions, but it does help to have that summary. Thanks.
Thanks for the question. No, the CVRD does not provide a summary. It's really important. We feel that the minutes and the submissions are presented as they are, so that the directors are able to receive that information, hear what they heard at the public hearing, and then make that decision on proceeding, rather than any sort of covering report that might add additional influence to the situation.
Yeah, and I don't want to suggest that decisions are only made on, numbers and, how many in favor, how many against, or anything like that. And certainly, we wouldn't want someone to just skip their homework and go to the summary. So thanks.
Next, we have Director Arbor.
Thanks, Madam Chair. And that was actually probably unintended, but that was a good cue up by Director Morey. I appreciate the latitude for a slightly longer presentation today, as I believe residents, especially in Saratoga, should hear the basis and rationale for decisions made by their elected officials. And in this instance, we receive a massive amount of information without summarizing or analysis by staff. For those following this issue online or here in person, the minutes that are attached in the agenda include 394 pages of the sum total of public input regarding a bylaw that would change the other racing zoning for the Saratoga Speedway from secondary use to primary use, and to allow for a campground in another section of the properties. As we recall, on July 19th, there was a public hearing at Miracle Beach School, and the public input is included here, along with other letters and emails input we have received since June 3rd of this year. In respect to local government staff not presenting any summary or analysis of the public input, this is due, from my understanding, to prior legal cases where it was argued that staff had biased reports through qualitative analysis. And as a result, it seems CVRD staff are providing the raw data only to decision makers for our consideration and analysis. Because of this, since publication of the public input on Friday, I've gone over the 394 pages of public input and categorized, summarized, and analyzed the data in order to inform my recommendation and my vote. I look at the data in two main ways. First, I simply categorize submissions in a spreadsheet based on two criteria. One, whether the submission was in favor, generally, opposed, or neutral in relation to the bylaw. And two, whether the person was from Black Creek or elsewhere. In regards to residency, I would only tick the Black Creek residency box if it was clear from the submission that the person lived there. Most submissions provided a street address or provided statements such as, I have lived in Black Creek for 30 years. If there was no reference to living in Black Creek or elsewhere, I did not tick the Black Creek resident box. For fairness, I also had to do a little bit of extra work because some people submitted multiple submissions, for example, by sending a couple of emails and then also presenting at the public hearing. In one instance, I found a person that sent multiple pieces of correspondence over the past 2 months and went to the microphone twice at the public hearing. For those people who did multiple submissions, I aggregated and counted submissions as a single submission. In other words, I followed the notion of one person, one voice. Secondly, in regards to the contents, which was the meat, I simply noted the emerging topics raised for or against as I moved through reading the submissions. This was a bit of a painstaking process, but allowed me to review every single comment and categorize it. So with all this said, moving on to the results, which I'm sure many are interested in here, I ended up with the following high-level findings. There were 220 individuals who took the time to offer submissions as part of the public input. 168 of the submissions clearly identified as being Black Creek residents, so about 76% of the input into the process was local by my account. 99 submissions from identifiable Black Creek residents were opposed to the bylaw. 64 submissions from identifiable Black Creek residents were in favor of the bylaw. 5 submissions were neutral from Black Creek residents. So by my analysis, it means that close to 60% of identifiable Black Creek residents' submissions were opposed to the bylaw. In terms of total results, including both Black Creek residents and those from outside the community, 112 were opposed to the bylaw, 101 were in favor, and 7 were neutral. So actually just 51% opposed when you include everybody, both outside and inside the community. I'll just be a couple more minutes. Moving on to content analysis. I could go on in great detail here, as identified 61 topics in the submission, either as a reason to be opposed to or in favor of the bylaw. This said, there were clusters of topics, and I'll list them here. On the benefit side of the bylaw, those in favor of the bylaw highlighted the positive economic impact of the racetrack, the positive economic impact of a possible campground, the positive social impact of the racetrack with references to the Speedway being a great family activity with a dedicated and enthusiastic supporters base. The addition of a campground in the area would be beneficial as people are having trouble securing sites in the region. And many submissions highlighted that the owner has invested to improve the facilities and enhance the experience for auto racing attendees. On the negative side, noise is a noteworthy and recurring concern, and submissions suggested it has gotten worse over the last year and that the noise bylaw changes passed in 2022 were insufficient. Concerns about availability of water, concerns about water management and runoff impact, concerns about lack of completion of a local area plan, concern that the proposed campground is too large, concern about fire risk with increased activity, concerns about burning fossil fuels for entertainment at a time of a climate crisis, concerned that the amenity package and what the community gets in return with the bylaw is much too little compared to the benefits the owners will receive, concerns about traffic impacts, concerns that no development permits were applied for when the owner made a number of land changes, concerns that removing the secondary use would allow the owner full permission to grow the operations and number of races. Please note everything I present here are my own findings. With this in mind, I want to talk about how I'm thinking about the vote today. Following the application, professional reports, bylaw draft, public input, there remains a large number of Black Creek residents who are against the bylaw. And for an application and process like this, I was expecting to see a much higher level of support. In context, the public process demonstrated that the Speedway negatively impacts the quality of life for a significant number of residents in the Saratoga settlement node. In regards to the campsite, concerns about the campsite and its site were raised in multiple submissions, and some submissions, including from neutral submitters, indicated more openness for a smaller campsite to start. With a number of issues and concerns left outstanding, I believe the bylaw should be denied today, which would maintain the status quo around the zoning for the Speedway and associated properties and activities. I want to be clear, this will not impact the ability for the Speedway to continue to operate as it has in the past. The owners could work over the coming years to demonstrate that some of the key issues listed in the public submissions can be addressed prior to obtaining a change of zoning that would grant the Speedway full primary use status. In regards to the campsite option, I believe that should a new proposal return for a smaller campsite, this could have a better chance of finding community support. While I appreciate the significant amount of work that has gone into this by the applicant and their good intent to provide a great facility and events for the community, I believe the committee should deny the application today. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Director Grieve?
Thanks, Madam Chair. From the get-go, and we're talking 2.5 years now, there's been some misunderstanding about the lawful non-conforming use of the Speedway. And it's been suggested that somehow it can be shut down or discontinued. And that's not what we're discussing here right now. What we're discussing is a rezoning of the area to allow a campground. It could be argued that the campground's too big, but I think when we get to the development permit stage, that would be addressed by the water supply issue, because we're still waiting to see what the new well is going to produce up at the Black Creek Oyster Bay system. So it looks to me like Island Health are not in favor of using the on-site wells, even though they do meet all the drinking water requirements. I guess the government looks at it as we've already spent a lot of money on that Black Creek Oyster Bay system. And as it is now, the Speedway is a card-carrying member of the Black Creek Oyster Bay water system. They've got, I think, 3 different connections available. One in 19, one in Macaulay, and I think there's one in the north as well. No oversized connections. They're not subject to the a moratorium that we put on the system until we get more information about the new water wells. But I imagine the problem is it's just hedging their bets, because the last thing we want to do is to have another, in 20 years, 30 years time, orphan system. We've got another private water system up in Black Creek, Oyster Bay area that's running into issues right now, and it's not a public system, so we can't really comment on it. But so I do agree that probably 168 sites is a little overreaching. But I think anybody that does any camping out there realize it, unless you're right on that computer at 1 second past 12 o'clock to hit the button to try to book a site somewhere on the island, you're not going to get a camping spot anywhere. Some of the issues we have regarding long-term stays, because 50% of the camping can be 6 months. That's something that has been in our Parks Department for quite a while. 6 months to me seems excessive when you're trying to actually be there for the traveling public. I know that the other 50% would be at the discretion of the owner. And I have heard rumblings that they would probably be more in favor of shorter stays. But as I say, we've got much process left to go. Just moving this to 3rd reading does not negate moving it back to 1st reading for more amendments should the need be. We got information. Well, geez, look at what we got here. We got McElhaney, McGill's Well, Fife's Water and Well, B4 Engineering, McElhaney's Rainwater Management Plan, Pacific Coast Acoustics, Traffic Impact Study, Glenn Steiker, Piang at McElhaney again. Referrals with LCB, KFN. We're talking about strategic natural resources and bioassessment. It's a litany of all the people we rely on, both the municipal and the electoral areas for professional responsibility. So I think all the boxes are ticked. As I say, I mean, if we're ever going to get any kind of amenities out of the system, I do agree that the 2 issues that come up, one is regarding the campsite, and that's mainly around traffic, and traffic studies have been done. Whether you reject any report that doesn't necessarily agree with your own worldview, or you embrace them all. I think that there's a lot of work that has been done here. We're not looking at any campfires. I think we've got one thing I did come across, so was when you talk about acoustics, and the owner talked about noise controls, 3 stages of noise controls. First is the completed one. I guess the big wall would be that. 2 is under construction. I imagine that's the swales. And then 3 are planned. So I think, it comes to noise mitigation. That's a big issue with me too. The 2 that really ring out is the noise and the amount of people in the campground, considering the water supply and considering that Island Health are not necessarily open to using on-site water, even though I'm sure it would be sufficient. I don't have all the figures here. I'm not going to ask Mark to get up and tell me how much the Speedway pays in a year for the water. But we have some serious infrastructure deficits up there that are going to have to be addressed in the fact that the water system is 50, 40 years old, and the old fiber asbestos pipes are starting to reach the end of their life. So there's going to be money needed to do this, and commercial rates on water are much higher than domestic rates, and they're not tiered. So I'd be more willing to move this ahead and to see how it works with under the development permit guidelines. We'll have much more discussion at that point. And as I say, if we don't have some of the issues addressed, and this is our chance with an application like this, local government actually has the opportunity to ask for some concessions, whether or not they're brought forward by the owner, it's volunteered by the owner, or whether or not it's something that we asked for. So I don't see any harm in moving this forward at this point, because we need to go to the next level to see where we're actually at. I've kind of stated the fact that the speedway itself is not up for discussion. What we can look towards is how we're going to be working on the noise controls, all the rainwater management, sewer systems, type 3 sewer systems. I can tell you right now that if you're talking about failing sewers, you have to look no further than the ones we've studied down at the foreshore, where we have a lot of failing systems. This is going to be a brand new system. So I'm not concerned about a lot of it. It's being addressed by all the professional reports. I don't know what else to say except the fact that this is our opportunity to maybe address some of the real concerns as opposed to some of the red herrings we've heard about. And I'm going to be in support. Thank you.
Thank you, Director. I don't know if staff want to speak to the process of timing if amendments need to be made. Is it best that they come at this time? Can they be made after third reading? And the concessions that the director was just speaking about, should they come after that point?
Thanks. I'm actually going to ask Tom True, our manager of planning services, to come forward. And Jody McLean is also the planner on this file. So I'm sure that they've heard that question around the timing of amendments to the bylaw. Should they be presented?
Hi, thanks. Through the chair, no amendments can be made after third reading. Once third reading is done, it just goes to the Ministry of Transportation for a technical review and then back for adoption. If there's going to be amendments to be made, it has to be done prior to third reading.
Thank you. Director Arbour?
And just to be clear by staff, we are on third reading today.
Correct, yes. You're considering whether to grant third reading here or an alternative, not grant third reading and go to amendments or other.
Thank you, which is why I appreciate Dr. Grief's perspective, but I think we don't seem to have the time that he's speaking of. If there's specific amendments that we want to the proposal, which is what I thought I spent a good part of the last couple of days thinking about, whether they were amendments, but the amendments I was going to suggest were probably too substantive and require a new bylaw. I think passing third reading right now really locks it in. I can go into some of the specificity of some of the comments that we heard. And one that jumps to mind is Dr. Grief talked about the amenities that we could negotiate for more. If this goes forward today, it's locked in, and the amenities being offered as part of this development right now is $25,000 contribution to the Black Creek Oyster Bay Fire Department. If I'm correct, staff, is that correct?
Through Madam Chair to Director Arbour, it's the volunteer contribution is $20,000.
Yeah,
that will go towards their Black Creek Fire Hall.
that's right. And so some of the comments that we saw is that there was no parks, there was nothing around the campground that would become public utility. So all that there was for the community when they made that comment, and a number of people made it around the lack of proper amenity contribution or benefits to the broader community in relation to the impacts. So when you look at $20,000 for the fire department, which has an $800,000 annual budget, it didn't feel like a lot to some people. So what I'm trying to say is, I would encourage Dr. Grieve that if he has specific requests for changes that he puts them forward today. I also have the question whether if Dr. Grieve doesn't do that, can we defer this item to a future meeting?
So on the question of deferring, yes, that is one of the options that you can take as directors, is to return the application back to staff for additional information to be provided. We would just ask that you provide some specifics around what that information that you would need is.
Thank you. And just to the boards, other board members are welcome to ask questions. I had this discussion with staff. The only issue is if there is a question that needs to be referred back to staff, that only the area directors can vote on that, as they can only vote on this matter. But the other members of the board are welcome to ask questions. We're going back to Director Grieve.
Yeah, just a question to the staff. My understanding is that the availability of water is critical here. So would that not be a consideration when we talk about the campsite, when we get to the form and development stage on that? It can't be set in stone right now. Because I would recommend we cut the campground down to almost half of what it is until we figure out where we are on the water issue. That's the biggest issue for me. And it says, and I read that the forming character in the DP stage, we can address some of that stuff. Am I not correct?
Through the Madam Chair to Director Grieve, just to confirm that this property is within the BCOB water system, and they can apply for a connection. The application itself, their applicant has informed staff that the two wells that are in place now is for the purpose of servicing the campsite.
My understanding is it didn't get any approval from the province at this point. Am I correct?
Through Madam Chair to Director, from what we understand as staff, the applicant is still either applying for an application or will be applying for an application, and there's no confirmation of approval yet.
Okay, so if it comes back to the BCOB, then we are the defining authority at that point, right? On the connections.
Correct.
Okay, that's what I'm trying to say. Thank you.
Go ahead, Director Moran.
Great, thanks. Yeah, I was just curious about the implications with the RGS, if there's anything in there that, I mean, I did sort of skim through, and there were certainly some comments that were brought up around that, and that is more of a, although I'm not voting on this, I thought it might be good to have the regional context question answered in terms of how this fits with the regional growth strategy and the settlement nodes and all of that. Thanks.
Jody, can you speak to the analysis that's in the reports with respect to the RGS?
Yes, thank you to the chair, to the directors. So the regional growth strategy, this is located in an area which is designated as a settlement node, and that's kind of the areas where the growth that is kind of is encouraged for areas where people can live, work, and play. And that's kind of the component of this, is that recreation area. This is an area where people, it's an employment node. It's a place where people can recreate. And that's what this proposal is supporting that.
Okay, I don't see any further questions. And we are just on receipt of the public hearing and the other information. So it's a vote of the full board on receipt. All in favor? Any opposed? That's carried. And this is the only bylaw on the agenda for tonight. So it was moved up so that we could let the gallery go after this decision. So we've moved the bylaw as the next consideration.
Just consider third reading for this bylaw.
Go ahead, staff.
Okay, thank you. Just offering that if there is interest in that referral that we had talked about, staff could look at some options around the water topic that has been raised. And Alana, I'm not sure if you'd like to add anything to that perspective, if the board is interested in considering that referral, respecting that the motion was moved and seconded for third.
Thanks.
Thanks very much, James. Through Madam Chair to the directors. As Ton said, the property is included in the BCOB local service area. So there is the opportunity to make an application now or in future for a connection for the proposed use, if indeed you do support the proposal tonight. If you wanted to, that the applicant has offered through the application process at the public hearing, that there was no intention at this time to connect an approved campground to the BCOB system. If the directors wanted to convey to your future selves, the public, your mindset around that, you could, for example, ask staff to look at working with the applicant to use a 219 covenant that would reflect the owner's position that there's no intention at this time to connect to the system. That certainly doesn't fetter any future board or the BCOB in future from enabling a connection, but rather what it would do would be to register that commitment on title at this time, just to give an indication of the mindset around water and access to the system, or pardon me, access to the service area.
Thank you. Next, we have Director Arbor.
Yeah, thanks. I can barely believe this was moved and seconded for third reading and not for one of the other options to return it to staff. I'm still on the denial side, so clearly there's a huge gap between directors. I don't understand Dr. Greaves' inconsistency in 1 minute saying that he would like to see half the amount of campsites, and in the next minute moving third reading, which forces him into a corner, because if we can't make a change to the number of campsite between now and adoption, it will be the maximum of number of campsite that we will be voting on. I can't believe the directors moved and seconded third reading, and I encourage you both to vote against that resolution. I certainly will.
Thank you. Just a question to staff around negotiation of amenities. Is that possible after adoption as well?
Through Madam Chair to the directors. You know, when we talk about voluntary amenities, these really are voluntary. And the reason that we say that is because there's no provision in the Local Government Act to extract amenities in exchange for zoning, right? And so I would suggest to you that that negotiation happens. We've got in the electoral areas, we have a board policy, an electoral area director's policy around what the negotiation of amenities look like. And in that policy and in the best practice around the province, that those discussions happen when the rezoning is on the table and the amenities are presented. Any offer of voluntary amenity is presented at the public hearing. And so that's what we've done in this instance. So I would suggest to you that it would not be good sound practice to think about having further discussions around amenities after this point.
Thank you. Director Jolicoeur?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. A question for staff relative to maybe other proponents of campsites in the region or across the island or in the province. Can you speak to other types of amenities that proponents of private campsites would have offered their regions?
Through Madam Chair to the directors, no, I cannot.
Thanks.
Okay, I don't see any further lights. The motion on the floor is for third reading. It's been first and seconded. It's the vote of the areas only. All in favor? Any opposed? And that's passed. And we'll take a 5-minute recess. Thank you.
They're not a big fish
Okay, so we are on to item 2 of the agenda, the strategic plan for 2023 and 2026. Moved by Hillian, seconded by Grant, and I'll pass it over to staff.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the directors for allowing us to present an update on the strategic planning process. I've got a very short PowerPoint presentation to share, and then, as you can see on the agenda, there are 4 recommendations coming from this report. So, again, thank you for the opportunity to present here, and this slide simply reiterates that respectful acknowledgement of the land that we are gathered on, being the unceded traditional territory of the Comox First Nation, the traditional keepers of this land, and for that we are grateful. Quick recap on the strategic planning process. It is an iterative and cyclical process. We're currently at the August 2023 to 26 strategic plan stage, and that's what is attached to the agenda. This is an outcome from your 2-day strategic planning session in June, and you can follow the cycle around the process there. After the strategic plan is presented and moving forward, then where there are new initiatives included coming out of strategic planning, then we would be presenting business cases for the board to consider the merits on advancing on those new initiatives. If there is merit from the board's perspective, then we carry on with our financial planning for all of the CVRD services, and ultimately look to adopt a budget in March, at the end of March of each year. And then we're back into our strategic planning sessions in June. So it is an iterative and cyclical process. Again, today we're at that August stage where we're presenting the outcome of the 2-day strategic planning session. Alison Habkirk is the consultant who's been helping us for several years. And so she facilitated that session, and her report is attached to this agenda. As a bit of a recap on the structure of our strategic plan, there are 4 or 5 drivers, and I say it's 4 or 5 because there is a recommendation in the staff report and some commentary from Alison in her strategic plan around accessibility, inclusivity, equity, and diversity, and whether or not that as a topic area becomes part of our community and well-being driver, or is presented as its own 5th driver. The strategic plan itself, we have these 4 or 5 drivers that really guide the way in which our services are delivered. You're all very familiar with the 4 of them, so I won't go over those. And then within those drivers or below those drivers are the core services of the CVRD. So as you know, we have approximately 102 services across the organization. That's a lot to keep in our heads. So we've broken this down into 8 core services, and there's 3 samples on the side there. You can see finance administration, sewer treatment, and recreation. But those core services are how we organize our strategic plan. For each of the core services, there are key service outcomes and then initiatives that are listed under each. And you can see that in the report. As well, and we can't lose sight of this, is the operations of the organization. So it's the service delivery of providing potable water, of providing recreation programs. And sometimes those operations don't get the same attention as the initiatives, but those operations occupy a lot of the staff time and a lot of the staff effort. And there's a lot of what the public will see in service delivery and in the CVRD and how we present ourselves in the community. So I think it's important that we recognize the operations are a major component of the strategic plan work and the board's responsibility. And so I've named it here as well. Coming to the recommendations in the staff report and presented here, the first one is to approve the strategic plan as it's presented. The second one is to adopt a mission statement, and this is actually shifting the vision statement to a mission statement, because I think the directors felt at the session that the language was more appropriate to be a mission statement. The third recommendation here is to include a 5th driver, as noted. The report does explain a little bit about the rationale for why that 5th driver, as opposed to incorporating it into our community and well-being driver. And then lastly, we're recommending that there be regular updates on your initiatives. So a few times a year, presenting in some format the initiatives and the general purpose of each initiative, high level milestones that will be needed to accomplish each initiative, and then the endpoint and some timing around that. It gives the board a chance to see where these initiatives are moving to, because sometimes we're working in the backgrounds on initiatives and it's not a topic for the board, but I think it's important that you see there are 36 initiatives named in the strategic plan. I think it's important that you see that breadth of work and the progress of those projects. And it also is a chance to then identify for you if there are risks or issues with some of the projects at a high level. So happy to take any questions, and you've got your executive team here as well to weigh in on the initiatives or other aspects of the strategic plan.
Thank you very much. And you have given us some options for moving forward. So any discussion? Yes. First we have Director Hillian. Go ahead.
Thanks, Chair. I'd just like to acknowledge all the work that staff have done with our consultant on this, and in general, I think it makes sense, and I'm supportive of moving it forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Director Moran.
Oh, okay, thank you. Yeah, I guess speaking to the fifth driver, of course, I was supportive of having that fifth driver. I do see that it is different from the sorry, I'm just trying to find it here. The community safe, what did we call it? Oh. I don't know if we can go back to that slide.
No, there was a slide on.
No, we didn't have a slide on the fifth driver.
I think it's called community. I'm not sure why I can't find it, but anyway, here it is. Community and social well-being. I do see it as separate and distinct, and it helps us to be to make sure that those items are always kind of forefront in everything we do. So I am supportive of having that fifth driver there. Thanks.
Thank you. Next we have Director Kerr.
First, just a thank you to staff. Again, wonderful piece of work, kind of putting that two-day discussion into a document succinctly as well. Second, just a reflection as I stare at the empty chairs in the room for this. I think a really important part of the agenda and our 4-year term is to delve into the strategic plan and make sure we have it right. Maybe even adding a fifth driver. And in comparison to, kind of emotional hot button issues that come up. It makes me just wonder, how do we make this more interesting to people? Because I think this is really interesting, really important, and very impactful on everyone in the Valley, but doesn't have quite the interest. So anyways, there's my thought for the day, my deep thought. I'll be thinking of this on my runs. So I'm in support of the fifth driver. I think it is different enough. I think, we talked about, do we need all 4 of those words in it? Maybe seeing them together, I actually kind of like it. I was thinking maybe pick the 2 best ones, but maybe having all 4 does make a lot of sense. So I support that. And I also, just like the discussion that we had on the housing as well, and the incorporation of that in this as well. So I'm supportive of this going forward. Thanks.
Thank you, Director. I think we know some of the things that will bring people into the boardroom. Backyard chickens, banning wood stoves, and racing, apparently. Anyway, moving on, Director Arbor.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, it is nice and succinct this year. And interesting, I was reading in the paper today, the city of Nanaimo was adopted yesterday to move to donut and outcomes-based budgeting. So I was really curious about that. So we're not seeing that here, but and there was a split vote. So they're having business discussion around how they go about doing the budget. I think we've held it steady for many years around how we do ours, maybe some changes upcoming this year, which is identified. The reason why I put my mic on is I thought there was one that might be a little bit, I want to use the word premature, but key 2023-2026 construct sewer extension south. I would love to see, in case any of my residents in the south area read this, that we are not jumping to the conclusion of the liquid waste management planning process before it is actually completed. I think we still have a lot of public input to receive before we make decisions around constructing the south sewer. So I would like to see that edited in the report. Otherwise, I'm very happy with everything else. And I also would highlight for the ESC. I appreciate it in transportation that coming out of our session that there's an item around improving the electoral area and Ministry of Transportation relationship regarding infrastructure improvements. That I'm really happy to see that there. Thank you.
Thank you. And I do want to extend thanks to the board for the 2 days of putting all of our minds together and coming up with this stuff, and for the many days of staff work that it took to take all those comments and put them all together into a report. Did you have some feedback? Yes.
Just on that comment around the amending the number 3 under sewage treatment on construct sewer extension south, and yeah, I think that's why I would like to we can make that adjustment, because I agree that's maybe a bit definitive, and I don't think it's ambitious. I think we can get there, but it's fairly definitive. So I think the emphasis there is probably around that liquid waste management planning process. However, I do think it's important that this regular reporting is provided so that we can put context around what some of these initiatives are, and you can see what some of those milestones are and some of those decision points that may change the direction of projects. And many of these projects could change based on public response, resourcing, other issues that might arise. So I think that's partly why the reporting is important for the directors to have that awareness.
Thank you for that. And we're on receipt, and I don't see any further lights. So to go the full board, all in favor? Any opposed? That's carried unanimously. And there's recommendation 1 moved by Hillian, seconded by alternate director Nicol. That's that the strategic plan as attached in Appendix A be approved. It's a vote of the full board. All in favor? Any opposed? That's carried unanimously. Recommendation 2 moved by Cole Hamilton, seconded by Kerr. And that's the board established the mission statement as on the screen. Any further discussion? Again, above the full board, all in favor? Any opposed? That's carried unanimously. Recommendation number 3 moved by Hillian, seconded by Moran. And that's the board update and affirm its strategic drivers. Any further discussion? Again, above the full board, all in favor? Any opposed? That's carried unanimously. On to recommendation 4. Moved by alternate director Shelley Kerr, seconded by Grant, I believe. And that's the update on the strategic plan initiative to be provided on a regular basis, including milestones, risks, challenges, and changes. And again, both the full board, all in favor? Any opposed? That's carried unanimously. Thank you very much. Thanks for all your work on that. Okay, so moving on to item 3, it's the Rec Commission minutes from March 21st. Moved by Greaves, second by Jolly Kerr. All in favor? Any opposed? That's carried. And item 4 is the Rec Commission minutes from May 23rd. Moved by Cole Hamilton, second by Grant. All in favor? Any opposed? That's carried. We're on to item 5, the Electoral Area Service Committee, August 14th. Are these minutes or are these? Oh, okay, yes. The recommendations from yesterday. Okay. So the recommendation 1, moved by Greaves, seconded by Nicol. And it's regarding the development variance permit for Ryan Road East. Any further discussion? This is about the areas only. All in favor? Has carried unanimously. Thank you. Recommendation 2. Moved by Grieve, seconded by Nicol, and this is regarding a development variance permit for Curtis Road. And so both the areas, all in favor? That's unanimous. Thank you. And on to recommendation 3. Anyone want to move it? Cole Hamilton and Hillian, thank you. And this is regarding the floodplain management bylaw exemption for Kilmarnock Drive. Any further discussion? Again, about the areas, all in favor? And that's unanimous, thank you. And that will take us to our in-camera portion.